Welcome into GC Live, everybody. Kendall Smith and Jack Veltri joining you here. Happy Wednesday to you all. We hope you are doing well, and we appreciate you taking some time to join us here today. We're going to talk all things South Carolina Gamecocks as we do every single Wednesday. Jack, we got a lot to get to here today. Some football conversations, some women's basketball conversations, men's basketball conversations. We've just got it all at this time of the year. This is always so much fun, and maybe we'll even hit on baseball a little bit at the end of this. But Jack, first and foremost, how are you? It snowed in Columbia.
It has snowed in Columbia, Kendall, and I understand that it's been snowing back in Charlotte too. So it's covering the entire region here in South Carolina, and it was funny waking up this morning, and I knew it snowed last night and stuff, but to see the roads just covered in snow, and it's crazy. It's like a winter wonderland out here. So it's pretty awesome, and hope everyone's been staying safe out there. How are you doing?
Yeah, for sure. We hope you all are staying safe. I'm doing well. It snowed here in Charlotte last night too, which we weren't necessarily expecting. And I'm from the South, so anytime it snows, and you are too, Jack, it's like, oh my gosh, like you've lived here for long enough to know that people freak out anytime it snows. So yeah, that was a bit of a surprise for us yesterday, but always fun. I was a figure skater growing up, so I'm used to the cold weather. But yeah, we got some snow here in Charlotte. All is well. You can see the skyline here behind me. It's not snowing anymore. But Jack, a lot to get to here today, and hello to everybody watching. I want to start it off with some football because even though it's no longer football season anymore, this is actually the first time we are doing GC Live where college football is officially over. We still have so much to get to talk about, not only with South Carolina, but want to recap the national championship with you as well. Your thoughts from Monday night's game, what are they?
I'm not surprised Ohio State won. I kind of was pinned into a corner where I had to pick Notre Dame to have a chance in staff picks, which obviously didn't work out. But it didn't surprise me that Ohio State won. It didn't surprise me they dominated the majority of this game too. And I know Notre Dame made it close in the end, only losing by 11 and even cutting it down to an 8-point game at one point. But this game never felt close. I mean, like, am I right on that? Like, it definitely felt like a wider margin, even when Notre Dame was cutting this game down.
Yeah, I mean, I did feel like Ohio State was in pretty significant control throughout most of the game. Of course, obviously, Notre Dame went up to start the game, but then Ohio State answered right back. And from there, it was just all Buckeyes, in my opinion. But major tip of the cap to Notre Dame for having the opportunity to really kind of get back into this. They made it a little bit more interesting than I thought it would be at one point in the game. At one point, I was like, all right, this is all Ohio State. It's going to be Ohio State all the way until the end. And we might see another blowout here. But congrats to Notre Dame for making it closer than I thought it would be. But yeah, Jeremiah Smith, I said it in my predictions, and I figured he would have a big impact on the game. Of course, he did a touchdown for him. And then obviously the game sealing, I guess you could say, catch that pretty much brought it home for Ohio State. So shout out to them. I know the Buckeye fans are excited. We have a big Buckeye fan base here in Charlotte. There are several bars that are Ohio State themed. So a lot of people were pretty pumped up about that win. And it was a good college football season. It was a great 12-team playoff. Unfortunately, South Carolina not a part of that. We're not going to go back and discuss all the craziness with that. We've talked about that too many times here on GC Live, but enjoyed the 12-team playoff, enjoyed everything that this season had to offer. I feel like it was a really, really great college football season as a whole. And we've talked about this multiple times here on the show, but just the number of upsets. You didn't really have one clear team, especially going into the playoff, that you were like, yeah, I definitely think that team is going to win. Obviously, when Ohio State kind of got into the thick of things in the playoff, you're like, all right, it's kind of Ohio State's to lose at this point because they were certainly playing their best football. But going into it, especially after a loss to Michigan, people are like, okay, it could be anybody's game. And I like that. I liked that about this season. I like that there was a little bit more question when it came to who is that number one team. Well, it ended up being Ohio State, but South Carolina had themselves a pretty good season as well. Didn't end the way that they wanted it to with the Citrus Bowl. But the beauty of this is that as soon as college football ends, the next day, the way too early 2025 rankings come out, and we've got Heisman odds and national championship odds. And South Carolina has been mentioned in a few of those, Jack.
Yeah, no, you're right. On not even the morning after. I think it was like
12:30 in the morning.
I got an alert on Twitter. I was about to go to bed, and I see an alert on Twitter. It's like, oh, the national championship odds for next year are already out. I'm like, all right, let me get out of bed. Let me go write this story real quick, have it ready for the morning. And yeah, South Carolina's in there. I mean, 60-1 odds which is tied with Southern Cal for 13th best. And that's crazy because you go back to last year, had to do a little bit of digging. South Carolina's odds, I couldn't get the exact, blank to one odds, whatever it was, but do this with what you will. I mean, they had plus 30,000 odds to, win this year's national championship. And that's not good at all. But to go from that to 60-1, there's a lot of teams still in front. Obviously, Ohio State is the favorite going into next year. Georgia, Oregon, Texas, all the teams that made the playoff. Alabama's in there too. Clemson has 20-1 odds. But the fact that South Carolina is in the mix there, it leads me to believe that I think they have a decent chance. And here's the thing. You mentioned the randomness of the playoff and, not knowing who's going to be the team to come out on top. Obviously, Ohio State, once they got rolling, it was kind of like, okay, they beat Tennessee. They beat Oregon. It's like, all right, we kind of know. But before that, it's kind of like, all right, it can be anyone's game. So that's the nice thing about it is that these odds, in theory, just don't matter. Like South Carolina could, not have a good season next year, and this would be a fun conversation all for naught. Or it could be a chance for them to get into the playoff, and they run the table. We just never know. So I've seen also that South Carolina is like the line is set at 6.5 wins for next season, which I feel like is tremendously low. If I'm a betting man, I'm taking the over on that pretty easily, I think. And then you got LaNorris Sellers in the Heisman conversation, which I feel like is not a surprise to anyone that watches South Carolina football. And honestly, national media it has been picking up on what Sellers has been doing over the last few months here. Honestly, probably since like November, it's been a real hype train here, especially after beating Clemson, and he's at plus 1,600 odds to win the Heisman Trophy, with Garrett Nussmeier being the favorite, and then Arch Manning right behind him, and even Cade Klubnik is in this conversation too, ahead of Sellers and Jeremiah Smith, obviously. So it's going to be really interesting to see how everything shakes out. Again, this is the beauty of college football, the season that just never dies. We have so much to talk about now with odds, and if South Carolina can make the national championship, if Sellers can win the Heisman. This is conversations that I didn't think we'd be having in the year 2025. 2 years now removed, a season and a half technically removed from South Carolina going 5-7. That's quite tremendous if you ask me.
Well, I just think it speaks to the job that Shane Beamer has done with this group and the way we've seen this program move forward. And I always say it's like my favorite line in the world, but progress isn't always necessarily linear. And although the 2023 season was a bit of a setback and a disappointment for a lot of Gamecock fans, you see what the team was able to do this year. And you can't talk enough about that national media attention that South Carolina is starting to get and the way that that could have implications for South Carolina in the future. When you think about the transfer portal window opening back up after spring practice and more guys potentially wanting to come to South Carolina, when you're a team that is in the conversation, and even though, they're not one of the main top teams that people are talking about when it comes to the national championship next year, they're still in that conversation. And you have these guys that hear that from the national media and they're like, hey, like if I went to South Carolina, could I be a player who could really take this team to the next level and make them even more of a conversation starter when it comes to the national championship, when it comes to the Heisman with LaNorris Sellers. I mean, gosh, you have to give him so much credit. And we've talked about that on the show as well. Just the way that he's developed throughout the season. The beginning of the season, people were unhappy with the way that he was playing. And now at the end of the season, the growth and just how solid he was for South Carolina, the way he's able to extend plays. I mean, you don't see a quarterback like that come around too often. What LaNorris Sellers is able to do and how he's able to make something out of nothing sometimes for the Gamecocks is beyond impressive. So I'm super happy for him and grateful that he's in that conversation, because I really do think that he is a guy next season that as he continues to grow, as he gets an entire offseason to get stronger, to get better, to work with this coaching staff. I mean, I really think the sky's the limit for LaNorris Sellers, and you're in the conversation with guys like Arch Manning and Cade Klubnik and Jeremiah Smith and the top talent in college football. And I do think that next year, LaNorris Sellers is a top talent in college football if he plays up to expectations in the way that we know he can play.
I look at that list, and I think all those players on that list, I mean, it's not even just the ones that I talked about. I mean, there's others that are right in the mix with him, with DJ Lagway, Nico from Tennessee, Drew Aller, John Matier that is transferred to Oklahoma from Washington State. It's a lot of different quarterbacks in this conversation. And then obviously Jeremiah Smith being a receiver is kind of the outlier here. But I think, honestly, pin LaNorris Sellers up against most, if not all, these guys right now. I like Sellers' chances. Like, again, this is without seeing what next year's going to for sure look like for him. Like, for all we know, he could take a step back and something just not click and he's out of the conversation. Or he takes that next step forward that, Mike Shula had been talking so much about just a few weeks ago, that there's still room for him to grow. He takes that next step. We're definitely talking about him for sure in that conversation, potentially being a favorite to win it. So I look at that list, and I think he's just about as good, if not better, than most of the players that are being mentioned. And I feel like those odds are pretty good for Sellers to where he can surprise a lot of people that aren't giving him much of a chance. And with the 5th best odds to win the Heisman, that is that's a nice recognition to have, especially after the season in which he had.
Yeah, and you even said it in your article, Jack. I mean, Sellers is going to have the chance to go head-to-head with a couple of these guys that are in the conversation very early on as well, including Nussmeier and Klubnik next season. So that will be a good test as well to see him have the opportunity to go up against some of these guys that are also guys that could potentially be Heisman Trophy winners. So a huge win for South Carolina, not only to have LaNorris Sellers be in that conversation, but also to even be in the national championship conversation. Like I said, maybe not one of the top teams everybody's talking about, but hey, they're somewhere in there, and that is progress for South Carolina, right?
Absolutely. It's massive progress. And again, that's not to make the college football playoff odds. That's to win the whole thing, which is, again, I think it's honestly a crapshoot to probably win the title just because there's so much unpredictability to it. Like, we don't even know who South Carolina would play. We don't know, if they're even going to make it. It's just the odds to have something like that, like to be within range of, get respect at least for potentially making the national championship or being in that fight for it next year. I think it's really impressive. And again, I think this team is going to be, regardless of how they come out in the season, I think at the beginning, at least at the start, they're going to get the national buzz. They're going to probably be a top 15 team in the country. I'd be surprised if the first AP poll comes out and South Carolina's ranked, in the 20s. Like, I think they're going to be ranked right in that top 15 range. People see that this is a program on the rise and that this season wasn't a fluke. And look, I think we've spoken about before, Kendall. I think on paper, they've definitely replaced a lot of the holes that needed filling. Like, you're going to lose so much talent from this past season that you needed to go out into the portal and high school recruiting and sign guys, bring in different players to fill the roles. Now, will they end up being a one-to-one translation of what Demetrius Knight, Kyle Kennard, Torcelli Simpkins, players like that were for South Carolina this season? That remains to be seen. But at least for right now, you can feel good knowing that, okay, South Carolina went out, did its homework, got a variety of players to come in, and they all believe in the message that Shane Beamer is preaching, which is obviously this is a program, like I said before, that is on the rise and isn't going away anytime soon, it seems like. So hopefully this is just the start of what the Gamecocks are doing. And, we'll see. Great teams, I think, take that next step forward, and we'll see if South Carolina is that type of team that can take that next step forward and not one that is backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's always a significant difference, obviously, between the good teams and the great teams and their process and what they do to get where they are. And I feel like South Carolina's really taking those steps. And we talk about how important that is with recruiting as well. And this national buzz and hearing South Carolina's name in these conversations, that's very important with recruiting too. And obviously the transfer portal pretty much summed up for South Carolina from this past month, but they will have another opportunity coming up. And now Shane Beamer, his staff, they're hitting the high school recruiting very, very hard at this point, which is always important. I feel like we've talked so much about the portal as of late, but yeah, there's still high school recruiting that's going on as well that South Carolina is certainly dialed in on. They're in a phase right now, Jack, where I think a lot of people are, understanding, that South Carolina is working on the recruiting side of things at the high school level. But in terms of the team and what they're doing right now, I think a lot of people ask and wonder, what does this time of the year look like for South Carolina's football team from a player standpoint? What are they doing?
Well, obviously they're, like you said, the coaches are going out on the recruiting trail for 2026 and stuff. We've seen that on social media and whatnot. But, Wes Mitchell put out a great story yesterday on Gamecock Central. It's a premium story, so if you're not already subscribed to GamecockCentral.com, highly recommend doing so you can go ahead and give it a read and kind of see what South Carolina has been up to and stuff. But obviously, they're going to be starting up strength and conditioning, workouts and stuff. And, the team is pretty much together now, obviously. So, they're getting their winter workout program going and obviously got to get in shape for the season and stuff. So that's what's been going on right now. And hopefully pretty soon, I'm not sure if we'll have a date or anything. I just remember last year, the media got to speak to all the transfers and stuff. And that was great and all that to hear from these guys that were joining South Carolina. So hopefully we'll have something like that in the next few weeks here. We'll see. But on Saturday at the men's basketball game, the newcomers will be honored at halftime. And that's always good fun. Shane Beamer speaking to the crowd during the game or at halftime and stuff. So be a first opportunity to see what these guys look like and, what they could bring. But that's really what's going on right now. It's a little bit more of a quiet period, I would say, compared to the hustle and bustle of the season. But it's, spring football is going to be right around the corner, guys. That's the great thing is that it's literally, we don't know when it starts, but I would assume, March going into April. So that's it's not too far from now, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Getting ready for that big spring game, what caps off all of the excitement for South Carolina during the spring practice period. But Jack, football season, it is officially over for now at the college level, obviously not the NFL level. We'll talk about your Buffalo Bills here in just a little bit, but your final thoughts, your final reflections on the season as a whole. It doesn't even necessarily have to be about South Carolina. I know we talked about just the craziness that college football was this year and not knowing who would win what matchup, who was the outright favorite necessarily to win the college football playoff and the national championship. So your thoughts on this crazy college football season?
I think this season rivals just about any amount of craziness we've seen in other seasons. I've seen 2007 thrown around as an interesting comparison. And, we were only 7 years old when that was going on. So didn't get to watch it live, kind of like we have this season stuff. But, looking back at different games and stuff, and obviously you got the great Fiesta Bowl from 2007 and all those types of matchups and stuff. It's always going to be different. But I think this year, it's just about as good as, 07, any of the recent seasons. It's just the unpredictability, like you said, Kendall, was just unmatched. Like not even in the playoff necessarily, but just every single week, there was always some random upset that just happened. And it's like, dang, that team lost. Like what's going on? Like you just never knew what was going to happen. It's kind of like the comparison I like to make is like, it's kind of like just March Madness, but just every single week in a college football setting where it's like, the football is that one sport where it's like, one team should probably dominate, but that wasn't always the case this year. Like Alabama losing to Vanderbilt, South Carolina pulling off a few big upsets here and there. And just there's so many different games, like Michigan beating Ohio State. Like it's stuff that you don't expect. And I'm glad it happened because it made this season a lot more entertaining. So that's the big thing I'll take away is that this season was so much fun to watch just from a college football fan standpoint. And obviously South Carolina had a pretty good season. So hopefully next season is better, which I think is going to be pretty hard to top.
Yes, entertaining is certainly the word. That is what I would say of it as well. I'm curious, just one final question because it came to my head as we were talking about it. When you think about the 12-team playoff and obviously a switch for college football this year and going to that format, I personally liked it. I thought it was great. It added a little bit more variability to what we saw at the end of the season. But I think, the question is, and this is something that people have been talking about for a while now, when you think of bowl opt-outs and other games that are happening outside of the college football playoff, do you like the way things are formatted right now? Would you like to see anything change? Where are you at with the way things are going postseason wise for college football?
Well, first off, I agree with you. I did like the playoff this year. I enjoyed the matchups and stuff. I know the first round was kind of a doozy, honestly, but once you got past that, once you get to actual bowl games and stuff, it really picked up and was a lot more fun. And again, the final four last week was a really entertaining 2 games that we got with Penn State and Notre Dame and Ohio State and Texas. Those were a lot of fun to watch. But I think if I was going to make any change, I don't think I would change the 12 team part of it. I would change the way the seeding works, right? Where number one, they don't reseed for whatever reason, which is something that is an issue because you look at the NFL, for instance, there's reseeding after every single round where the highest seed plays the lowest seed, and that's the way it should be because in some cases like this year, you're getting a very top-heavy side of the bracket while the other side is a little bit weaker in some cases. But I feel like it all worked out well where Ohio State playing Notre Dame and stuff. I think the other thing you have to figure out is I think the conference championship thing is a bit of a discussion point of, okay, Boise State was a 3 seed, a 3 seed, right? And then Clemson was in as the 5 seed, and then Arizona State was that 5th seed or 4th seed in terms of the conference champions and stuff. So I think that was a little bit of like, not to say these teams don't deserve to be in, but it's like, they get the first round buys and stuff in most cases. And I just don't think that's I mean, sometimes it's earned, but I feel like it should just go to the best teams.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is not giving these teams a home playoff game kind of defeats the purpose of working so hard all year to not only earn a bye, but then you want a home playoff game. It's easier for the fan bases and stuff to not have to travel to 3 different games like Ohio State and Notre Dame both those teams weren't even conference champions. So, those teams only had 1 home playoff game. And then, these others like Penn State, I mean, those fans had to, all these different schools have to travel a lot. So the point is, I like the 12 teams. I think it should be reseeded number 1 after each round, but also we got to do something about the conference champions. I think it's just got to be the 12 best teams, like however you want to rank it. If a team wins a conference championship or not, whatever. I'm sure conference championships might go away. I don't know, but overall, I like where things stand with 12. I don't think you need to go up to 16, 24, all that. You're just getting into basketball territory, and that's it's going to prolong the season even more.
Yeah, the automatic bids are tough to a certain extent. I think that was my biggest problem with it. I would agree with you on most of what you said in that assessment, Jack. I feel like a team like Oregon. You look at a team like Oregon, you're like, that draw for Oregon was rough, especially after the season that they had. But obviously things had to shake out the way that they did in the seeding, because if you're the committee, you have promised certain things to certain teams like Arizona State, Boise State, Clemson, etc., because they won their conferences. So yeah, that would be my takeaway from it as well. I think that a couple of adjustments could be made from that standpoint, but overall the entertainment level, and again, I know the first round of games wasn't the best, but as you continue to move on throughout the playoff, very, very good. But I do think a couple of those teams, again, like in Oregon, for example, it's like after the season you had, and then you got to run into an Ohio State, which obviously they beat Ohio State earlier in the season. It's a tough draw for Oregon. And I think that, that ended up the way that it did, obviously, because of those automatic bids and those promises that were made to certain teams that won their conferences. But Jack, with that being said, I think that kind of sums up everything in the 2024 college football season. It was such a fun year, and we're going to talk more football on GC Live as the weeks continue. Again, recruiting, winter workouts, spring practice for South Carolina. There's always news in the world of football, so we're not done talking about it for good. But for this week, we will turn our attention to basketball. Before we do that, though, Jack, we need to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor of GC Live.
That's right. Right above us here, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market for a home right now or looking for help with your mortgage and you don't know where to begin, Clint is your guy to call. He's been in the mortgage industry for more than 20 years, and he's a lifelong Gamecock fan, longtime supporter of Gamecock Central. And he, of course, like I said, he's always above us here on all of our GC Live programs if you're watching live right now. But if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him, 71597. Or go to ClintHammond.com. And again, he'll take you through the process step by step.
All right, Jack, time to talk some basketball. Let's start with the women's team. Sad news that College Game Day no longer coming to the South Carolina LSU game. Some changing of the schedule, obviously due to the weather that happened in Columbia. And, it's tough if you're South Carolina, that game getting moved to Friday now, and it's a bummer, but still such an exciting game. Always one of the best games of the year, South Carolina, LSU, a little rivalry matchup. And I know a lot of people are looking forward to it, but obviously a bummer because of the weather scenario.
It really is a bummer. And in case you missed it, that game that was supposed to be played Thursday night with College Game Day in town and all that is now moved to Friday, and that game is going to start at 5 p.m., which is, I can imagine, going to be very inconvenient for a lot of folks that were planning to be at this game. And, I think people will still get out to the game, but it's a lot asking people on a Friday to make it into town, rush hour and work and all that. I mean, that's a real. I didn't like that they put out that time, but again, everyone they have their reasons for it with moving the game to 5 o'clock. The other part of it is ESPN is going to be the broadcast for the game, but College Game Day will not be a part of the whole program and stuff. So no game day, don't expect that. But I think this is still going to be a very entertaining game nonetheless. Like you said, South Carolina, LSU have a bit of a history now with women's basketball and stuff. Kim Mulkey, Dawn Staley, you put them up against each other, there's going to be fireworks. And last year was definitely case in point about that. And look, this LSU team has been phenomenal this year. You can argue they maybe are better than South Carolina in some ways, but I think this LSU team is coming in here with a lot to prove. Obviously, losing to South Carolina last year, in Baton Rouge, and then also in the SEC tournament. I mean, look, this is going to be one of those games that a lot of eyeballs are on. I'm pretty sure, again, I don't remember the exact number, but I know a ton of people were watching that game out in Baton Rouge last season. And obviously Angel Reese is no longer around, but I don't think LSU's really missed a beat at all with Flau'jae Johnson averaging 20 points. You got Anissa Morrow with 18.7 points. Michaela Williams with 16.5, and Kaylin Gilbert with 11.2 points per game. I mean, this team is just loaded, and Kim Mulkey has done great work out there with this Tigers team, and I think they are really having a great season so far. But I think South Carolina's got something to say about it because they have been battle-tested all year long. I mean, they've been playing really good basketball against solid competition. Like, you just beat Oklahoma, a top 15 team, by 41 points on your home floor on Sunday, and that's coming off a win over Texas, who's supposed to be the other top team in this conference, and then you got Alabama on the road. So got some good wins on the resume. I think that's something that South Carolina has an advantage of over a team like LSU, and we're going to see what happens. I think this is now probably – we'll see what happens with Texas and maybe even Kentucky, who's having a great season as well. But this feels like the game that creates separation, if you will. Not even, maybe more separation for South Carolina. But in terms of being the top team in this conference, I feel like the winner of Friday's game kind of lends itself to that point of, if LSU wins, they remain undefeated. If South Carolina loses, they have 2 losses. And it's the opposite, where LSU has a loss and South Carolina continues to roll after losing to UCLA, what feels like forever ago. So going to be a really interesting matchup. I'm looking forward to. I think I'm going to actually end up being there, helping out covering the game on Friday. So it'll be a lot of fun being out there at CLA for a women's game, and should be. I think it's probably going to be the game of the year, honestly, in women's college basketball.
Yeah, I remember my senior year of college. So our senior year of college a couple of years ago, LSU coming to South Carolina. I just started an internship with Turner Sports. I was working for NCAA.com, and I got to cover that game. It was like one of my first weeks working with them. Had the chance to go in person, cover that game. It was absolutely unreal. I mean, at Colonial Life, whenever the women's team plays, it's always an electric atmosphere. But that game in particular really, really stands out to me. It was one of the best sporting events that I had experienced in my time at South Carolina. It was awesome. But, this matchup between these two teams, the rivalry, I love it. I'm sad College Game Day can't be there because that's obviously just an added layer of excitement onto the game. But obviously circumstances didn't allow it this time around. However, you mentioned it there. South Carolina is just rolling up until this point. And obviously LSU has had a fantastic season as well. But you think about South Carolina now, 3 games in a row where they have beaten top 25 teams. And this past game against Oklahoma, domination. And I think that's what we've seen from South Carolina here as of late. We talked about it on the show last week. They're really hitting their stride. That early season loss may have been one of the best things to happen to the group, because now you're just seeing them game after game, week after week, continue to show why they are an elite program, why they're one of the best programs in the country. They're battle tested and they're constantly going head to head with the top teams in the country. And they've proven over these last several games that even when it's back to back to back, this team is still going to roll. So I think they have that momentum on their side as well. Obviously, LSU has a ton of momentum too. I mean, they just keep on winning. But when you think about it from the perspective of what South Carolina has faced over these last 3 games, I think that momentum serves them really, really well heading into this particular game against LSU, because they've had this pressure on them now. I mean, they've had pressure on them all season. They always have pressure on them because they're South Carolina women's basketball. So of course there's an expectation nationally for this program to live up to a certain standard. But these last 3 games in particular against ranked opponents obviously have proven that South Carolina is willing to handle that and able to handle that game after game after game. So I think for them, it's like, okay, it's another ranked opponent coming here to Colonial Life Arena. Let's just keep it going. Let's keep the train moving here, because that's exactly what they have done, especially as of late.
No, totally. And the thing is, I mean, they're doing it without Ashlyn Watkins again, who's now out for what seems to be just the rest of the year with the ACL injury and stuff. But you're getting production from literally just about everywhere on the floor. Like, you had 5 players scoring the double digits on Sunday in that win over Oklahoma. And it's 3 players off the bench coming in and absolutely balling out. You got Joyce Edwards, who just won SEC Freshman of the Week for her performances against Alabama and OU. 17 points on Sunday. Really good game for her. Malaysia Fulwali. That shot she took at the buzzer from deep 3-point range. I mean, that's probably, I mean, I wish I was in the building to hear just how loud it was, because it was insanely loud from the standpoint of watching on television and stuff. And then Tessa Johnson getting 13 points. I mean, look, this team is loaded, or however you want to spin it. They're a force, obviously. And I think it's going to lend itself well to, LSU's got a ton of great talent too. But I just think sometimes the team with the more depth, the more talent that can go out there and score usually wins, it seems. And South Carolina plays great defense. They're just a good all-around team, which I think could really help in that, this game's at home too. And I know it'll give LSU an extra day to get ready and whatnot, but it'll also give South Carolina an extra day to prepare. So again, I think this is going to be one of those games that all the eyeballs are on, regardless of it being at 5:00 on a Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun watching this game, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to it.
Yes. Cannot wait. Again, that game coming up on Friday, rescheduled due to weather, but it's still going to be a great atmosphere at Colonial Life Arena. And one of the best matchups, in my opinion, of the year. South Carolina, LSU, and women's basketball. It's a great rivalry now, and I am excited to tune in and watch. But Jack, before we start talking about men's basketball, let's give a shout out to our next sponsor of GC Live.
That's right. We got to talk about our good friends over at Prize Picks. So Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of stat players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty before, as you guys know, if you're a regular listener here, and it's a lot of fun right now. Look, college football not going on anymore, but look, you have college basketball, you got the NBA going on, you have the NFL playoffs continuing to roll on, NHL. I mean, look, the options are still endless. Baseball's going to be starting up soon. Got a lot of good stuff to pick from. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Use the code on screen that stands for, or GC, that stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups.
All right, Jack, check-in time, Buffalo Bills.
Ah, man, great game on Sunday.
Well, I don't even want to talk about last week. I want to talk about this week.
Yeah.
Gotta check in. This is the game of the weekend.
Oh, it's gonna be.
Everyone's tuning in.
Look,
He's watching that game.
everyone was tuning in for that Bills Ravens game. That was a classic. But man, I mean, Bills Chiefs, the fourth time around. Look, I know my Bills haven't beaten the Chiefs in the playoffs yet, but you know what? You got to believe it's going to happen. So, look, I really do feel like this is. I don't know. I don't want to say this is the year, but if you get by the big boogeyman in Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, I feel like you can run the table and win the Super Bowl. So let's see what happens. Sunday's gonna be really interesting. Gonna be sweating a lot of bullets, I'm sure, but I'm really looking forward to Sunday.
I am extremely excited. My boss is a huge Bills fan, and he is thinking of driving to Kansas City for this game. He drove to Buffalo last week.
Wow, that's dedication.
Very much a dedicated fan. That's why I love the Bills fan base. I feel like that fan base is one of the best in the NFL. Like your fans are dedicated, like heart and soul, love the Buffalo Bills. So I'm a little sad because I did say I wanted it to be the Bills and the Lions in the Super Bowl. And obviously
the Lions kind of blew it for you.
But the Bills still could be in the Super Bowl. So we'll see. Big weekend of NFL football coming up, and always exciting at this time of the year with that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the Bills have to say. It should be hopefully a good game, and maybe this is Buffalo's year. Who knows? But speaking of teams that maybe, haven't been able to get over the hump recently, South Carolina men's basketball is struggling quite a bit. It's been rough. They have a game here tonight, so, always next game, always the opportunity to turn things around. But your evaluation, Jack, of what's been going on, because it's been tough to watch.
It's been very tough to watch. Where do I begin? South Carolina's 0-5 in conference play. Haven't won a game in the new year. It's been a little while since they've gotten a win, and at some point they got to win a game, right? It's I just don't know. This conference is extremely tough this year. You got number 5 Florida coming into town tonight, and we got a question here from Michael Lynn who says, "Does Carolina cover tonight against Florida?" And most cases we'd be talking about, can South Carolina beat Florida? But we got to have the discussion of, can they just cover? And the spread right now is 12.5 points in favor of Florida. I don't know. The thing for Carolina is they got to get off to a good start in this game. I mean, you can't be coming out playing lackluster basketball. You can't be turning the ball over 25 times like you did the other night against Vanderbilt. I mean, that was just egregious basketball to watch. And, it seems like they're lacking some energy. The motivation just doesn't seem to be there, or at least on the surface, from people that just watch this team like, we do and stuff. And I think it's gonna be tough to get rolling here, especially with how difficult this next stretch of games is, where I think 6 of your next 7 games are against teams ranked inside the top 25. That is brutal. And we talk about the schedule being brutal in general. No one's feeling sorry for South Carolina, because this is a team that won 26 games last year. And I know this isn't last year. It's obvious it's not last year, but something's got to click for them. I think they've still got the talent to get some wins here. It's just they're banged up right now, number one. They're not playing clean basketball. They're making mistakes. I mean, when you do that, when you don't start out quick, when you turn the ball over at the rate this team does, you get your best player into foul trouble seemingly almost every game. I mean, it's a recipe for not success, at least. So South Carolina's got to really get it figured out here. I don't have a clear-cut answer as to what needs to exactly change. There's a whole list of things that need to improve here for the Gamecocks, but it's kind of the opposite of women's basketball right now in terms of where things stand. Where South Carolina men's they're in a bit of a hole right now.
Yeah, the men's team facing Florida here tonight. It's not going to get any easier for this group. Florida, obviously a very talented team. The SEC, a very talented conference. So like you said, hopefully things will get better for this group. But I think we could sit here and talk about it all day long and what's going wrong for the team. But at the end of the day, Jack, that's all over on GamecockCentral.com. So people want to go see a little bit more insight, a little bit more analysis on what's going on with the men's team right now. Please head over to GamecockCentral.com. Follow Jack because he is at every single game, paying attention, staying up to date, and making sure that you all are in the loop as well when it comes to the men's team. It is disappointing, especially after last season. I think that's the thing. It kind of feels like, in a way, but not necessarily the same. between the 2022 and 2023 football season for South Carolina. It's giving that same kind of vibe of like, all right, you're expecting this trajectory to continue upward. And then this year just falls flat, unfortunately, for the Gamecock men's basketball team. But the women's team continues to shine. So that's a plus. That is a positive. And baseball's coming up here soon. Are you excited for baseball season?
Oh, I could not be more excited for baseball season. And look, I love covering basketball. I love covering football, but as you know, I mean, there's just something about baseball that just, I mean, it's the start of spring almost. I know it's going to be freezing out on Valentine's Day. And heck, the scrimmages start this weekend. I'm going to be bringing my winter coat and all that to cover these games. But it's going to be nice to have, it feels like it's obviously a new era of baseball here at South Carolina, but I'm really, really looking forward to it. It'll be like a breath of fresh air, honestly.
Yes, it will still be freezing though in February. It will be so cold. I mean, for me working in professional baseball, our season doesn't start until the end of March. So we have a significant time difference between when the college season starts and when the professional season starts. I will say though, you're at spring training and we're in Arizona, so it's like so nice. You know, obviously in Florida, same thing. It's gorgeous, beautiful weather. And then you come back and even in Charlotte in March sometimes it's like, okay,
it's
freezing cold.
Yeah.
But there's something about the start of baseball season that I really do think is just magical. Like the smell of the grass and obviously being outdoors. And South Carolina has one of the most incredible baseball fields in the entire country. Founders Park is gorgeous and beautiful and amazing and all things that a college baseball field should be. That's exactly what it is. So very much looking forward to that and wanting to get more into that here on GC Live over the next couple of weeks, talking more specifically about expectations for the season. But let's just end it off here talking about baseball a little bit, because I did say at the beginning that we would hit on it just a bit here at the end. Jack, when you look at this team, kind of a new era of Gamecock baseball, a lot of excitement, a lot of talk surrounding the season. When you look at the roster and what South Carolina has to offer and who they'll play and whatnot, what are your expectations for the group going into this year?
Well, I think when they hired Paul Mainieri, I think everyone's expectations were, all right, when are we booking Omaha, right? You know, like it's got to happen eventually, right? Like you can't. The problem with the Mark Kingston era was, I like covering Mark. Mark's, I've said it before, like I enjoyed covering him. He's a good dude, and I really hope he has a successful time out at Creighton. He finally got to Omaha, right? But I think with Paul Mainieri, you don't bring in the winningest coach in college baseball right now and have the expectations of, we'll fall short of Omaha again. You got to get there. Have to get there. Doesn't necessarily need to be this year, but you sure would like it. And I think if we're talking about 3 years from now, Kendall, if South Carolina hasn't made it to Omaha by 2028, 2027, whatever year is 3 years from now here, then I feel like we're going to be talking about, okay, was this a successful hire? Because, winning games is great and all, but if you're not getting to the College World Series, that's a problem. But I think this team, I'm not sure if, again, we have to see them play on the field against real competition this season. I'm not sure right now if I think they can get to Omaha, but I'm not sure if they're going to be. I mean, there's so many good teams in the SEC, number one. I mean, this is going to be a conference that there's 16 nationals or 16 hosting sites for the regionals and all that. And then the top 8 get the super regionals. It's going to be a conference that is vying for a lot of those bids. And I think South Carolina can be one of those teams that gets one of the latter bids for hosting a regional. That would be great in year number one. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if this team has to go on the road, maybe as a 2 seed like what we saw last year, which is not an issue. If you're getting to the tournament, that's great. But you got higher goals than that. I think this team is very much capable of it. I think without knowing exactly what the rotation and pitching staff and the lineup's going to look like, I think this is going to be a team that figures its pitching out as we go through the preseason here, as we kind of get closer towards opening day. And then as the season comes along, you start to see, okay, this guy steps into this role, this guy steps into that role, because keep in mind, you're having to replace a few starting pitchers, you're having to replace a few key arms in the bullpen. You got a lot of figuring out to do from that standpoint, but I think they have the arms to do it. It's not as cut and dry of like, okay, you have your proven arms. You have like a few years ago, you had Noah Hall, Jack Mahoney, Will Sanders, guys like that from the 2023 team that you knew were going to be the starting rotation. And then your bullpen was going to consist of a lot of veteran leadership out there. And then with the lineup and stuff, it's obviously Ethan Petrie, and then who else steps up besides him? A few names I'm really liking, and we're going to see if it continues over into the preseason here. Henry Kazmar, I would keep an eye on that guy at shortstop for sure. I think he's going to end up winning the starting job for sure when it's all said and done. And then I'm really looking forward to a returning guy having I wouldn't call it a bounce back. I wrote about this in a story I did recently on 5 guys that I think that could bounce back. Kennedy Jones. It's not that he had a bad season at South Carolina last year. He was fine. Like, he almost hit 300. But the problem was, you look at his numbers last year compared to his time at UNC Greensboro, all of his numbers were down. He was hitting like 350 at UNCG, double-digit homers every season, much higher RBI total. Heck, his hits were even higher too. I mean, all the numbers, OBP, slugging, I mean, however you want to script it up, the numbers were better. The competition obviously is harder in the SEC, but I think for a guy like Kennedy Jones, now in his second year in this conference, and this was a guy that, I'm hopefully we're going to get to talk to him here soon and get his side of the story. But, this is a guy that wasn't even sure if he was coming back to South Carolina because, Paul Maneri had to have a conversation with him about, hey, we want you here and stuff. So we'll see what happens. I'm really looking to see how he does this year. There's so many other guys, but I think in summary, this is going to be a team that is definitely competing to get to Omaha, which is all you can ask for, really. It's just, this is a rigorous schedule. You play Clemson in non-conference play. It's always the early test. And then SEC play, as we all know, is going to be a challenge. So we'll see. South Carolina, I feel like it's going to be flying a little bit under the radar, not being ranked going into the season. And maybe that plays to their advantage. I'm really looking forward to what this team can do.
Well, I can tell you're looking forward to it. I
know. I just gave you the whole
analysis. I said, what are your expectations? We get in-depth analysis. So I am very much looking forward to it as well. I love baseball season, and South Carolina baseball is exciting because there are those expectations around the program each and every year. When you think about the history of this team, what they've been able to do, what they've been able to win, and now again in this new era, I think South Carolina has a lot to prove this year, and I think it will be very, very exciting. So certainly looking forward to that. And a lot of questions that you just brought up there, things that we're trying to figure out rotation-wise, whatever it might be, those will start to become answered over the next few weeks. We are in a very exciting time for baseball because we're going to find out a lot more as South Carolina gets into these scrimmages, as we stay up to date with that, cover it, and then obviously leading into opening day, which is coming up in February. It's
3 weeks from Friday. We're almost there. Forget Valentine's Day. If you like to celebrate that, that's awesome. Go to Founders Park for opening day. That's where it's at. Heck, have an opening date out there. So
nothing more romantic than the sport of baseball. Actually, though, the amount of engagements that have happened at games that I've been working in,
it's crazy.
It's unbelievable. Crazy. People love it. So yeah, go out to Founders Park, enjoy it. Your Valentine's Day weekend. No better way to start off your weekend, and then obviously enjoy Valentine's Day than spending it watching a baseball game, specifically watching South Carolina baseball. So we'll get into more of that next week. Talk a little bit more after we get some insight from you, Jack, about these scrimmages that are coming up here, and then we'll kind of really start to go full force on baseball season and continue to talk about basketball as well, and football, obviously, too, because that news never, ever stops. But I think that's all we got for today here on GC Live. We really, really appreciate all of you joining us here. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. We will be back next week with more. So for Jack Veltri, I am Kendall Smith. This is GC Live here on Gamecock Central. Have a great day, everybody.